We assist with disaster preparedness, communication, and recovery on a worldwide basis. Our primary focus is disaster preparedness and communication between affected areas and potential assistance for long-term recovery. Over the course of years, we've looked at and we feel we have developed and live by certain principles. We're there to assist districts, clubs, and individual Rotarians. We try and listen and facilitate local situations and issues, and we're here to help you. Projects are chosen by local Rotary clubs and districts, not by DNA RAG. We encourage use of local suppliers and workforce expertise. We are geared to preparedness and training as an area of focus. We stress international coordination. We stress transparency and accountability. We are fiduciaries to those who contribute their time and resources to assist us in our projects. We try and team with other Rotary action groups and Rotary International and our International Foundation. We don't view Rotarians necessarily as first responders, although many are touched in their hearts when they experience or witness disasters and reach out. We focus on the long-term recovery of community. That's a little bit about us. And hopefully this webinar will reach you in regard to the urgency and impact of preparedness and training. We're fortunate today to have with us an individual who carries many titles, but it's not the titles, it's actions that speak much louder than any words or any title. And this is a man of action. I've gotten to know him over the last 20 years, and I have the greatest respect for him. Yes, he carries the title of past RI president and chair of our foundation, but I've seen him in action. And Barry, if you would give us your words and a charge.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that introduction. You caught me there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Really good to have you with us. This really is an important conversation. You know, I've been working with disasters for a long time, to the point some people said I was going to be known as the disaster president. I asked them, please don't use that title. But first, I wanted to thank Bob for his leadership for the DNA RAG, and of course, Phil and Mike for helping lead you through the preparation today. They've done an incredible job at bringing the DNA RAG to another level, and I think that's really important. I'm a strong believer in Rotary action groups, and I continue working in the background to just ask me if I was speaking Italian. I hope I'm not, but anyway, so working in the background, working with Rotary International to give Rotary action groups a bigger play in the Rotary world. They really focus on something, they become experts, they know what to do. I've had the privilege of working with Bob, as he said, for over 20 years. Never forget him when the earthquake hit Haiti. Within 24 hours, he was able to convert the fund he had for Katrina to the fund that we could start for the earthquake, and we moved quickly to raise $6.5 million for earthquake relief. And a lot of it is about speed. You've got to move quickly because the Rotary world turns to the next disaster as soon as it happens. And that means you got to be prepared. If you're not prepared, it takes a while. I won't say what country, but one country asked for a disaster fund, but they waited 6 weeks. So they hardly raised any funds. You've got to move quickly. That means you've got to be prepared. That means every Rotary club, every individual, every district, they've got to know what's going to happen next time there's a disaster, whatever that disaster is. I'm in the area where we know there's going to be a hurricane. I know there's going to be a hurricane this year. They tell us it's going to be the worst ever, but by the way, they tell us that every year. But somebody told me yesterday there's not many mangoes growing, so we're not going to have hurricanes this year. So, okay, but let's be prepared because you don't know, and that's the bottom line. And it could be hurricane in my area, it could be earthquake, it could be fires, it could be tornadoes, it could be volcanoes, whatever it is that could affect your area. Florida the other day, no hurricane, no big storm, just so much rain, they flooded out. They needed to be ready for those floods because a lot of those houses know that they're going to get flooded. So be prepared. That's the bottom line. We've all got to be prepared as individuals to know what to do. I'd also ask you to know what the latest guidelines from Rotary International are as to what you can do through the Rotary Foundation. The disaster fund is now a general disaster fund. And we do ask everybody to donate something to the general disaster fund because that enables us to react quickly with a grant of $25,000 to an area to help them right away. And that's important. Again, speed, move quickly. But the reality is that a lot of Rotarians step up for a specific disaster. So we convince them to also have an opportunity to open a disaster of magnitude fund. So when we have a really big disaster, then we're able to open a fund just for that and raise money right away. We can do it within 5 days, but the district is responsible. The district has to make sure it meets the criteria, sign the forms, send them, and the chair of the foundation has the authority to make that happen. So we're not waiting for staff, waiting for bureaucracy here. This can happen. I know in south of Brazil, they had the serious flooding affecting 7,000 Rotarians. And we were able to process that. The moment it hit the criteria, which was 3 days in, we were able to approve it. And within 4 days, we had a fund. And they've been raising money and doing the job they need to do. So you can't do that if you're not ready to do that and don't know the rules. There's one area that contacted me a week after the disaster. What should I do? That's going to miss a few days. So you are all here so you can be the seeds or sow the seeds in your area to make sure that your individuals, your clubs, and your districts get ready. Have their committees, have their discussion on what can be done. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, make sure you talk about partnerships. Yesterday, I went to get a healthy smoothie. I'm trying to get myself healthy these days. And somebody walks in who just started yesterday with a new ministry we have in our country for disaster risk. And immediately she wanted to know who to contact in Rotary so that we can have an agreement between us. Because the last disaster, honestly, the hurricane that hit us, Dorian, there was no agreements. And we talked for a year before we could come to terms. She's going to help us get that agreement this time, which is fantastic. So who is going to respond to a disaster? And all those who respond need to know beforehand who does what and who does it when so that it's coordinated. I still remember a disaster in Central Florida. Rotary was set up the next day to provide food. Red Cross came down and said they're not going to set up to help anybody until Rotary gets out of there. I mean, really? We've got to have those conversations before it happens so that awkward and stupidity doesn't happen. But you've got better things to hear from Phil and Michael. I just wanted to welcome you. Thank you. Just remind you how important this is. There is climate change, and I know some still don't believe in it, but I can tell you the water in the Bahamas is hotter than it's ever been in history. And if a storm hits us, it's going to be a hurricane because of the temperature of the waters. That's just a reality, and we better be ready, because if we're not ready, we're going to lose a lot of lives. So thank you for being here. Thank you for taking this seriously. Thank you for being the stalwart for the DNA RAG. Make sure you join, by the way, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Michael? It's on you, Mike. And are you muted, Michael?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Good morning. Our goals for this morning webinar are simple. Simply, we are encouraging Rotarians in zones and districts and disaster regions and clubs to have disaster preparedness goals, to have something they're working for, or to have an organized plan, right? We ask districts to have preparedness committees that will assist and support the clubs in their districts to be better prepared for disasters. And we encourage these clubs, as they're developing their club plans, to encourage their members to have individual and family plans at home for themselves. And we encourage districts to develop a standard methodology in advance, a framework for how they would respond to disasters when they will occur. Phil, over to you.
Thank you. Before I start, I have to send a note to the University of Colorado this morning to add the mango listing. Barry, that's a new one on me. It's critical at the very highest level that we face overall geographic threats, which can be either at the zone level, regional level, district level, individual districts, and have that level of oversight. Excuse me. Had that level, of oversight for disaster management, and a functioning committee that can assume the overall oversight of disaster planning and response. The structure should be different from the zone or from the district and region, but one of the things that we feel is important is to have two subcommittees, one for preparedness and the other for response or recovery. It's really critical to understand, and Barry mentioned this. If you're not prepared, you're going to just run around in a circle. And I've been quoted frequently as saying, "I've never met a disaster that didn't laugh at your disaster plan," but you have a plan which gives you a framework to start from. And part of that is understanding the geographic boundaries that are in common. We had a conversation last night during our annual general meeting about what's an appropriate area, and frankly, it's dependent on the geography and what common risks that are faced. So that, and Barry mentioned Brazil. Brazil was unique. They have 31 districts in Brazil. 7 of their districts in the southern part of that 31 were hit by floods, and there were well over 500,000 people who were displaced by the flooding. So Brazil might be a region. We often consider the Caribbean. That's 3 different districts that are impacted. Or if you go to, in Africa, we mistakenly thought Africa was a region, but the reality is Africa should probably be divided or subdivided into 5 or 6 specific regions because of the different risks that they face. We all are able to share our resources, especially through DNA RAG, but also through the partners that we work with to help face the disasters that we know are going to happen. We just don't know when it's going to happen or what it's going to look like. But if you have the plan in place, you're better prepared. So we specifically want to have people draft a strategy where they know that what the risks are for their area. Mike, back to you. Michael? You're up, bud. There you go.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about disaster preparedness at the club level, rather, whether it be a Rotary or a Rotaract club. A little continuing the discussion about being prepared, right? The best way to respond to any disaster is to have a plan. And as we say, if the disaster strikes, it's not the time to start making a plan. We remember in my district 7-20 experiences with Irma, and one of our artists donated this photo to us because it really emphasizes our experiences as Rotarians in that we all have each other's back, as we say. We all look at each other and help in times of need, right? A key part of this philosophy is to being prepared and working together. And we look forward to working together to rebuild in disasters. In terms of disaster planning for clubs, this is a big topic, and we should have a separate webinar just for this, and we do have in my district for our individual clubs. But there's a simple template or framework that we do this. First, we ask everyone in your area, in your locality, to identify what are your risks, right? From those risks and an assessment of how frequently they may occur, or the severity of their impact, you can prepare plans for your clubs. Very importantly, clubs organize a way of contacting themselves, each other, in the event of a disaster. Don't rely on the cell phones. They won't work. So you need approaches in neighborhoods, nearby Rotarians to check on each other to assess where everyone is. Very importantly, in advance of the disaster, Rotary clubs need to create the liaison with their emergency responders. We need to invite them to our club meetings, understand what they do, how we can help them as Rotarians, and develop those relationships beforehand. In our planning, we frequently compile a list of resources that our members have collectively between us. We were speaking last night at our AGM and discussing with the districts in Florida who have resources in these 40-foot containers filled with equipment that they would respond to a disaster. But each club needs to assess where you are, who has chainsaws, who has backhoes, right? Who are your professionals that can help in a disaster. And very importantly, while we develop plans at the club levels, we really want and encourage every individual member to, in their homes and families, to develop their own contingency plans of how they would react in terms of a disasters. And then once we have those plans in place and it's known to all members, right, then we encourage clubs to conduct simulation exercises, perhaps within a club meeting. Let's act and play as if a disaster has occurred now. What would we do as a club? And that develops our approaches and helps us practice long before the disaster. In assessing each of our risks, right, which each club needs to do in their area, we tend to have different types of risks. I see Cecil here from Dominica, and I know volcanoes is a risk in his area that I don't have in mind. We ask everyone to look at your risk. For me, in red are some risks that have evolved, that we've come to mind rarely in the last 4 to 5 years. I remember in the year 2019 having a discussion in DNA RAG whether pandemics were a risk. I'm glad that we did decide it was a risk even before COVID struck. But of recent times, this week, very recently, we've seen other climate-related risks, heavy rains, flooding and mudslides, heat stress. I was awoken this morning by a family member in Toronto telling me, and at first I thought my phone wasn't working, of heat stress in Toronto today. And they're in the 90 degrees, rain is falling, it's liable to go over 100 degrees, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to deal with the heat stress of kids today that need to go to school. The heat produces wildfires, the sea level rises. Barry has spoken a lot to us about that and the effect on the Bahamas, right? So our risks are evolving, and we need to ascertain that. Of course, industrial accidents and the risk of just at home, right? They're always there. But assessing risk is really the first phase of developing a plan. What should we face? We work very much with as Rotary work with the UN agencies, and their Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change advised us in 2021, and they made a statement to say climate-related disasters will increase multifold by 2030. It took some time to really understand what the term multifold word would be. But here we are in 2024, and we're seeing clearly the manifestation of that. Phil, I'll turn it over for you for the next slide.
Thank you, Michael. Just if you go back one slide, Mike, I just want to point one thing out. In the discussion of risks, we added heat stress this past week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, after looking at what's going on in the world. Michael mentioned that in 2000, actually it was probably 2017, I was talking about pandemics and people thought I had 3 heads. And then 2 weeks ago, there was a record heat in New Delhi of 50 degrees centigrade, which I think equates to 127 or 129 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a problem. And as Barry so correctly noted, our ocean temperatures are higher than they've ever been, and that just feeds hurricanes. So, and also sea level rise. So we have to be really, really cognizant of that. Mike, could you move forward? I'm sorry, I don't know why. Okay. As far as planning is concerned, we, as being people of action, we have actions that take place before disaster, which is the focus of this webinar. We have actions that take place during disasters. We'll have future webinars on that, and then after the disaster. One of the things I'm fond of saying is that because we live where the disasters happen, we're there long after CNN leaves the scene. Barry mentioned, and I will mention the area that waited 6 weeks. It was probably, I think he's referring to Nepal after the earthquake in 2015. We recently finished, and as you probably all know, the foundation will not pay for bricks and mortar, but through our 501c3, we can help building buildings. We don't build them, but we can help collect the funds so that they can be built. But a hospital was just the funding for a new hospital in Delaka, which is about 100 kilometers east of Kathmandu, is being built for mothers and babies by a Dr. Rehachan he's from Australia. And again, that earthquake was in 2015. We're still working with the folks in Nepal to rebuild the infrastructure that was destroyed by that earthquake 9 years later. So that, I would say, is after the disaster. It's pretty long term. Excuse me. So after or before the disaster, Mike, can you move it forward, please? Thank you. We need to have organized and committed senior leadership. Everybody's got to buy in. And we've been working with the great help of Bob Stewart and some of the folks in zones 30 and 31. This past year, Mike and I did a couple of webinars at the zone level. And they've driven that down to the district level where every district now has a disaster committee. There's a note here on the slide about district disaster funds. I know that in District 7020, part of the district dues are allocated each year for disaster funds so that in the event, when it happens, they don't have to start collecting funds. They've got a pot of money right there that they can tap into today. I don't know of any other district that does that, but I think that's a great model for people to look at. I talked earlier about the regional disaster focus, and again, coming back to the Caribbean, that's 3 districts coming together, or in Brazil, 31 districts coming together because of something that happened in 7 districts, or in District 9212 in Kenya. They're now working with District 9213 and 9214 because of things that are happening regionally in East Africa. And what DNA RAG does, we don't create the projects. We want to work with a district disaster committee that creates the projects, approves the projects, and then says, okay, we need help with these projects. We partner with Rotary International, and our non-Rotary partners are people like Disaster Aid, Team Rubicon, Shelter Box, in the Caribbean, SEDEMA, which is similar to FEMA in the US, Aquabox, and others. And then we just create a library of disaster tools that are available. And you'll find that on our website, which is DNA-rag.com. Michael, go ahead. It's on you.
Good. Let's speak a little bit about how we would react during a disaster. It's very important to convene a committee, a high-level committee, to respond to that disaster in the district as soon as possible. I remember the situation in Dorian that hit Barry's Island, right? And that committee actually started 2 days before the hurricane struck. These disaster-specific committees where I equip that. This is where I see all my past district governors who know the clubs, know the regions, and are terribly concerned about the Rotarians and communities in the various areas. But this is a high-level committee specific to the disaster. And they start establishing contact with the Rotarians on the ground beforehand to say, you know, how are you prepared? Is there anything we can do? How do we keep in contact? And getting information on the situation on the ground, so they as a committee can help disseminate this disaster information to the wider world on behalf of those who are on the ground. We need to activate fundraising promptly. We all know the susceptibility of the news media to quickly focus on something else in a few days. So the fundraising appeals must be activated very promptly. Remember recently in the last Haiti earthquake, where the disaster happened at 8:25 a.m. on a Saturday morning. And before 4 p.m. this afternoon, Rotary and DNA RAG had a fundraising appeal on a website activated and actually taking our first contributions to the disaster. With those resources, financial and other material resources that our good neighbors and Rotarians make available, we assist in channeling these resources to the local clubs in need and helping the clubs in understanding what their situation is. In a disaster, there's a deluge of information. There are people making contact, there are good Samaritans, Rotarians and others pledging assistance, be there in terms of material assistance, advice, offers to be on the ground. But we need to manage that information and make sure that all of it is retained and available to everyone in the disaster committee to help work on that. Towards that end, we have a technical tool we call the app that is really, to me, our shared database, a common hymn book that we all sing out of, where we know up to date the information on the disaster without having to ask each other what's happening in the disaster. So record keeping is a key part of it. Phil, I'll hand over the next slide to you.
Sorry, I keep having to, I forget to unmute myself. Just circling back a little bit to two comments that Michael made. When you talk about fundraising promptly, you also have to think about fundraising appropriately. I don't remember which disaster it was, but my daughter called me and said, "Dad, my friends want to make a contribution. What do they do?" And I said, "Well, have them go to our website. They can cut a check and send it." And she said, "Dad, are you crazy? My friends don't write checks." And that afternoon, we had a donate now button up on the website. So we have to probably be a little bit more up to date. I guess I'm a dinosaur. And we'll talk more about the app that Mike talked about. But that has become such an integral part of our how we operate after a disaster. We use that database as a planning and project management tool. And what it does is it allows us to track a project from its concept till its completion. And it allows us to have people on the ground do reports and upload them, do a report on their phone or a tablet, upload it. That report is time-stamped and geolocated. They can take photographs of what's going on and upload them from the field, time-stamped and geolocated, so we know exactly what's taking place. So that helps us with our accountability and transparency. That really does. That's part of helping clubs with their resources. We try and encourage, and I've sat on a number of these disaster committees as an advisor over the years, and I can think of only one time where I said, "Wait, no, you don't want to do that. That doesn't make a lot of sense." We just sit there and encourage people. We help with the location of supplies, and again, as I said earlier, usually, the disaster will laugh at your plan. I remember that during Irma, we were staging supplies in St. Croix, and then 5 days later, here comes Maria, and that's how that storm became Irma Maria, because it was really one storm right on top of the other. But it hit St. Croix, where we had staged all the supplies for relief in the other parts of the Caribbean, so we were unable to move those supplies. The channeling financial help to other clubs is really important, and we do that through our 501c3. When we have a memorandum of understanding with a district or a district disaster committee, we will hold funds that are donated specific to that disaster, and they tell us, okay, we have a project. The project has been vetted, it's been approved, and now we need to fund it, send the money, and they give us the exact instructions on how to send the money to whom, and it's done through the clubs. We don't control it, we just send the money. And that's part of the stewardship and reporting. I can't think of a single disaster where we haven't learned something. Usually they're not happy lessons, they're things that, but they're learning points. One of them, for example, is we discovered that one of the weakest points of infrastructure is usually ports. And, excuse me, getting stuff in and out of impacted islands is really difficult if the port is shut down because of a disaster. And then the last thing on this slide is the long-term psychological impact not only on the victims, but on the relief workers and the rescue workers. This is really critical. Make sure that the people in your community, in your committees, in your districts and clubs are are not going to be adversely impacted after an event, because those things do happen, and I've seen it personally. Mike, back to you.
Okay. I'd just like to take us through an obvious scenario. A disaster has occurred. And here we have a district trying to coordinate the response to the various communities through the clubs in there. And that district needs to be organized, right? There are many players, many balls in the air. And we try to organize, we recommend organizing just by conceptualizing a life cycle of how the clubs who have experienced the disaster, Rotarians are breaking out. I'm glad Mike Stafford is on the call, because oftentimes we see great Rotarians who, their house has been destroyed, but they're next to their neighbors or at the water plant trying to get out water for the community. But the clubs know their community. They can assess the needs of the community and identify ways that Rotary could assist, right? We need to help these clubs to formulate plans, let them know that we have their back. We can assist them with resources to support their good plans, and that we are fundraising to expand those resources. So that's the first phase. The ideas come from the clubs on the ground who are seeing the horrors as they unfold. The district is in real time, constantly monitoring the situation, reviewing the situation with the clubs, assisting them to conceive of plans, make good plans. A plan is more than just an idea that we want to help. It needs to be structured so that we can make sure that we achieve our goals at the end. Within this high-level specific disaster committee by the district or the region, right, there's a subcommittee that's just reviewing project applications, making sure it satisfies the guidelines that are issued for successful projects to be approved, helping the clubs to complete those applications. And once they've approved, to provide the funds directly to the clubs quickly. And also helping with the record keeping that we need to keep to manage these disasters. And then the district encourages and monitors and coordinates with the clubs to implement the projects. The clubs are the implementers, and they also compile the information on their various actions. I can think of just the database we have on the Dorian disaster and the wonderful efforts of the Bahamians and Grand Bahamians in the response. Just troves of information and details of how they spent the resources and organized, and the pictures of the situations, right? We need to keep track of all of this information just to make sure that we are good stewards. Sometimes at the end, the projects are completed, and project closeout may be a little difficult. We insist that projects are closed out properly. There is a final stewardship reports. We have receipts and invoices and bank statements to verify how the funds were spent. And the district helps a lot in these efforts to close out the projects. And the end goal is just to make sure that we have activities and actions that really meet the needs of the community, that they're sustainable, that they're on time and within the budgets approved, and that we have the transparency and accountability to show the outside world. We know very much that the same people who helped us last year, because they can see the good work that we have done, it's documented, we run a much higher chance that they'll help us this year if there is a hurricane, or a disaster. So transparency and accountability and good stewardships are very important in this process. Bill, back to you. Bill, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Sorry, I keep muting myself because I'm coughing like crazy. Clubs are greatly helped by making learning resources available and accessible, and it needs to be available in all kinds of channels and all media, making sure that we take care of privacy issues as it relates to member information. We have a set of resources like these could best be constructed within your district website or other joint information. And particularly, we should have templates for plans, examples of good club plans, and make sure that you delete information that might be sensitive here. Recorded webinars for disaster preparedness. You'll find some of these on our website. Reference, and by the way, the plan is to distribute a copy of this recorded webinar and the other two webinars to all people who've registered for the webinars, including the slideshow. You can go to the DNA website. We have developed, or actually Zones 30 and 31 have developed a handbook that's available now on disaster preparedness and recovery. And Mike, if you would stop your sharing 1 second, I want to pop something up, okay? Michael and I have talked about this on the screen. Can you see the app sheet, Mike?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
This is from what we call HERC, H-E-R-C, Haiti Earthquake Relief Committee. And this is just a listing of the projects that were proposed. And as you see, not all of them were approved. These icons here are indicative of reports that have been filed. This particular one, 3004, was approved for $31,500. The wire, this tells when the wire was for the funds was sent. The stewardship reporting, the preliminary report, the in-progress report, and the final report. So this gives us really good information. And I mean, if I pop that up, this shows you pictures, gives you descriptive information. There's just a trove of information available, and here are your after pictures. So that's the type of stuff that we like to have available as a resource. We're talking now about resources for clubs. And Mike, you can go, oh wait, if I stop sharing, where is that? Stop share somewhere. There you are. Thank you, Mike.
Great. I think we're at question and answer.
Yes, we are.
Mhm.
Right on time. So are there questions? I think maybe we should put the gallery up.
Yeah, this is the most important part.
Phil, can I recommend that people put their hand up the way Ingo has, and then we can unmute them in order?
Yes, absolutely. You can unmute yourself. Ingo, you're up with your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much. And apologies for me having to use a mobile phone for whatever reasons. Thank you very much for this very interesting and good webinar. I myself, I'm in Thailand, District 3540. I've been working in disaster preparedness and response for international organizations like UN OCHA, Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, WFP, UNICEF, WHO for within the last 20 years, and have quite a lot of experience how the international response, also preparedness, is actually organized. And I think that's very important and also an opportunity for Rotary International to consider and then perhaps to strategically align. because there's a lot that could be done and planned for preparedness, response, and recovery. But we also need to be aware that if it's not well and strategically organized, then there could be a lot of duplication and waste of efforts and resources. I've been, for example, as it was mentioned, the intercluster coordinator of the UN, or the international response to the earthquake response in Nepal in 2015. And I also saw how many private organizations wanted to donate and wanted to help, but did it in a very not well aligned and organized way. So there was suddenly a lot of duplication with NGOs and organizations who did certain things. And then they found out private sector was doing the same in the same area and so on. But I don't want to go too much into the details. So what I would propose is also knowing that the capacities of districts and Rotary clubs to deal with all these issues, disaster planning, to develop a disaster preparedness plan is very, very limited. So my proposal would be maybe first at a higher level now in this group, etc., to do some more strategic planning and discussion. And I would be very happy to participate and really contribute also my experience how one could actually connect to the international response system and structure, how it is organized, because that would be a good opportunity and option for Rotary International at global level, at national level, in countries, and then down to local levels to really align and becoming a partner of this international response and also preparedness system, which would help then also to channel what capacities, resources, and so on Rotary could contribute in a way that might be most effective and efficient. But let me stop here because I'm already talking a little bit too much perhaps, and I guess there are some others that would also like to contribute. But anyway, thanks very much. I would be happy to continue also perhaps in smaller circles, some additional strategic discussions, because I really think also one would need really to help Rotary clubs and districts with more clear guidance, because they will be overwhelmed if one just asks them come up. I notice that even UN organizations in different countries have a hard time really to develop disaster preparedness and response plans. And I did simulation exercises a lot for various disasters, including pandemics. But I know that this will be difficult for Rotary if we don't provide a lot of really good strategic guidance, which I think. Thank you very much. And back over to you.
Thank you.
Let me,
Bob?
if I can jump in here, because you've got, okay, I'm sitting as chair and we have a few board members on this webinar as well as Barry. And what I would request that you do is if you could place in a couple of short paragraphs your concepts and your thoughts and address those either to Phil or to me. And I would make sure that Barry received a copy of that as well. And then we can sit down and digest that and get back together on a Zoom at some point in the near future. But I think that's an important item to consider.
Yes.
I will to do so. Can I do it just in response to the invitation to this webinar, or because I'm not sure, Robert, is that correct? You were just talking whether I have your address.
Ingo, I've got your excuse me, Ingo, I've got your email. I'll send you Bob's and my email address, okay?
Sure. Bob,
Okay,
may
great. I do so.
Yeah, may I make a few comments to that? I think raises a critical point. Rotary is just one of the players in responding to disasters, and the need to interact with wider organizations is critical. From my own experiences in the Caribbean, where we have multiple districts working together, all the countries now have a joint intergovernmental body called CDEMA, right? Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management organization. And one of our key Rotarians, PDG David Edwards, actually goes and sits in those meetings to listen and to be aware of the wider perspective. And I know CDEMA closely coordinates with the UN High Commissioner on Refugees, their offices in Panama, proactively beforehand. So I think a very good point has been raised, and we need to do more of that.
Jimmy, before I jump to you, Ingo, I know Barry will remember this very well, but shortly after the earthquake in 2010 in Haiti, there were well over, I think it was more than 150 NGOs scrambling around in Haiti with no direction. There was no national government that had collapsed because of the earthquake. And chaos would be dressing it up and putting lipstick on a pig. It really was. It was chaotic, trying to figure out who was doing what. There was so much duplication of effort. But at the end of the day, because Rotarians live there and we remain there, we stayed fast and we were there continually and still are. I just raised that because your comments about duplication of effort are really spot on, Ingo. Jimmy, you had your hand up.
Yes, so it's in response again to Ingo and asking everyone. We will be letting you all know the follow-up. Obviously, you'll get links to all three webinars, and this is our starting point, to expand our reach and increase our impact. And what we are hoping to do is the very thing that Ingo highlighted, and that is utilize the resources that are here on the screen, because you all have skills and expertise that can do something either locally, nationally, or internationally. And that's part of our follow-up plan. So thank you, everyone, for your contributions.
Barry, did you have a comment?
You're muted, Barry.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. There was actually 1,500 NGOs in Haiti, and we call them voluntourists because they come saying they're volunteering, but they really came to get a story and get a headline. Rotarians don't do that. And I want to also make the point that Rotary International is not an immediate relief organization, but locally we are. We got to remember that. These are our people, our friends. We locally are going to get out there and help right away. But RI is more designed for the long-term relief. So as Phil said, when CNN is gone, when all the volunteerists are gone, we're still there getting the job done. We're still working on Dorian from 2019, but nobody hears about what's going on anymore. That, again, is why we need to be so prepared. So prepared for immediate relief, but also thinking right away, what are we going to do long-term? How are we going to rebuild all those schools to get the kids back? Because if they don't go back to school, they don't eat. But anyway, I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you, Barry. Bob, some final comments from you because we're right on the hour.
Well, once again, I truly appreciate the passion that you who are on this webinar exhibit. And we need your help. Just to be totally candid, we have a Rotary Action Group that is supposed to be global in nature. And we have roughly 300 active members. And we have well over, I would say, 1,500 on our mailing list. And we're expanding that. But we need your help. And each of you brings a different skill set. It may be on the individual basis, and you're an ambassador, in effect, of DNA, RAG, and Rotary every day. And we need your help. You can go to your local district and the District International Service Chair, the DIS, who is in charge of bringing resources into Rotary clubs from all over, volunteer. Go to your Rotary club and present a program on individual and club preparedness. It's as simple as that. And if you want to get involved at the district level, or you want to get at the zone level, or if you want to get into active with Disaster Network, we're here to accept whatever you can give us and whatever assistance we can give back to your club, your district. That's what service above self is all about. And I've never been so proud to be a Rotarian as following the efforts that I saw during Katrina. And that happened back in 2005. I'm completing a project for another foundation which closes the door on Waveland's effect out of that disaster 20 years later. And it's just this year that we're finishing up what the mayor called in Waveland, Mississippi, the final act in regard to the response of the hurricane. 20 years later. Long term, that's what Rotary is all about. We give back of ourselves into our community. We encourage you to join DNA RAG, and we encourage you, if you run into a disaster that befalls your community, we're here to help. The family of Rotary. Please join us. We truly appreciate your passion and your being with us. Thank you very much. And thank you, Barry, very much. And you, Phil, and Michael, exceptional. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you everyone for being with us today.
You will receive a recording and the PowerPoint. Thank you.